September 2nd, 1940, 10 in the morning, South Wales. Acting Lieutenant Stuart Archer arrives at the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company's refinery at Llandarcy near Swansea, and the situation is already past the point where standard procedure applies. 2 oil tanks are burning, one 50 yards away, one 80. Steel components near the flames are beginning to melt. The heat arriving in waves across the concrete hardstanding is the kind that makes your eyes water before you are close enough to see clearly. 4 unexploded German bombs are somewhere in the storage area. One of them is directly beneath an oil tank that isn't burning yet. Archer brought 1 sergeant and 12 sappers from Cardiff. He has what equipment the section carries: a stethoscope to press against the casing and listen for the tick of a clockwork mechanism. A clock stopper device weighing 90 kilograms, roughly the size of a horse collar, designed to arrest that mechanism with a magnetic field before it can complete the firing circuit. And a set of extraction keys available only since June. He has 5 years of architectural training, having qualified at 21 as an associate of the Royal Institute of British Architects at the youngest possible age. He has roughly 8 weeks of experience handling live German bombs, having joined bomb disposal in June 1940. Over his career, he would render harmless more than 200 devices. None of the previous ones had looked like this. He decides to tackle the bomb directly beneath the intact oil tank first. The logic is cold and precise. If that bomb detonates while the nearby tanks are already alight, the unlit tank becomes a third fire and the complex becomes uncontrollable. The extraction has to happen here, now, in this heat, under these conditions. The bomb has embedded itself diagonally into the corner of the concrete plinth at the base of the tank. The only way to reach it, upside down. So that is what Archer does. He positions himself at the edge of the plinth and goes in inverted, reaching down at full stretch while oil burns on both sides and the heat builds with each quarter hour. He has calculated that 15-minute shifts are the maximum his sappers can sustain without their hands beginning to shake enough to make the work dangerous. Any longer, and the fatigue translates into the kind of small errors that become large consequences. They rotate through the morning, one man coming out as another goes in. At midday, one of the 3 other bombs detonates. The explosion comes from 150 yards away. The team throws itself flat on the concrete. Debris, the possible trajectory of burning oil, the blast pressure. You wait to find out what has hit you. Then you get up, confirm each other, and return to the plinth. At 2 in the afternoon, a second one goes off. Same response, flat, then up. The bomb Archer has been working has a complication that no procedure covers. The casing split on impact with the ground. The main explosive filling, powder, not cast, is visible through the crack in the steel. The fuse head has been ripped away. Wires are tangled where it should be seated. He can't read the number stamped on the fuse head because there is no intact fuse head to read. He can't follow the standard extraction procedure because a standard procedure requires a standard bomb. He improvises. He takes the circular base plate off with his hands. He picks up a trowel and begins to scoop the powder explosive out of the cavity, carefully, in small quantities, until the fuse pocket is exposed. He grips the tangled wires with pliers and pulls steadily. The clockwork mechanism comes free. He places it in his pocket. Then he looks back into the tube. There is a second mechanism. It sits beneath where the clockwork device was seated, invisible from the outside, positioned in the same fuse pocket directly under the device he has just removed. It's designed, by whoever engineered it, to fire at precisely this moment. An enemy bomb disposal officer has successfully extracted the first device, believes the bomb is clear, and is at the point of lowest vigilance. Archer unscrews the second mechanism. There is a crack, a small flash. A detonator fires, a small cap, not the main charge, and nothing else happens. By 2:50 in the afternoon, Archer emerges from the concrete plinth with a pocketed clockwork assembly, an intact anti-withdrawal device, and the notes he will write up for the War Office. He is, by the subsequent record, the first man to successfully remove an anti-withdrawal device from a German bomb and survive. What he carries in his pockets that afternoon is intelligence. Intelligence paid for with the same currency that bought all intelligence in that particular war. The near certainty that the man doing the extraction wouldn't come back. He is 25 years old. The Blitz on London has been underway for less than a month. When it was rumoured within the bomb disposal service that the average life expectancy of an officer in those opening months ran to 10 weeks, nobody doing the job disputed it. Some accounts from the period put the figure lower still, closer to 2 weeks in the first weeks of September 1940, before any procedures had been established for the fuse types the Luftwaffe was deploying at scale. The figure was described as a rumour, meaning it circulated among the men rather than being formally calculated. The exact methodology behind it has never been reconstructed, but the rumour circulated because it felt accurate. And it felt accurate because they were watching each other die at a rate that made any longer expectation feel optimistic. The Royal Engineers were the Army's bomb disposal force because someone had to be, and the decision had come in September 1939 as a provisional arrangement. ARP wardens were the intended long-term solution. The long-term solution never materialised. By May 1940, a formation order made RE responsibility permanent and created 25 bomb disposal sections, each comprising 1 officer, 1 sergeant, and 14 sappers. In June 1940, the total number of unexploded devices handled across all of Britain was 20. July, 100. August, 300. Then, on September 7, 1940, 350 German bombers flew over London in daylight, killed 900 people, and the Luftwaffe returned that night. The Blitz had opened. In September 1940, the Royal Engineers handled more than 3,000 unexploded bombs across Britain. In the period from September 1940 through July 1941, over 24,000 devices were made safe. Between August 1940 and January 1941, 25 BD companies were created, each with 10 sections, meaning the force was expanding at precisely the moment the learning curve was steepest, with men who had received less training than the officers who were already dying. The reporting chain for a UXB started with an ARP warden, trained on a 1-day identification course, who reported the device to police. The police established the cordon, 600 yards in radius, all premises evacuated, all roads closed. The call went to the nearest BD section, and the officer led his men to a street that was otherwise empty. If the bomb had penetrated the ground, and most did, the thin-cased SC-250 hitting at roughly 12 degrees and driving 20 feet down before its fins were ripped off and it jinked sideways, the task began with finding it. The hole of entry in the pavement told you where the bomb had gone in. It didn't tell you where the bomb had come to rest. Most stopped roughly 20 feet down, but the semi-armour-piercing variants penetrated as far as 60 feet into London clay. The fins, when found, confirmed the bomb's dimensions. The dimensions confirmed the likely fuse pocket positions. None of this told you what was inside the fuse pockets. A sapper's diary entry from the night of September 17, 1940, records the next steps in real time. We arrived during the night of September 17, 1940, in the middle of a raid. Find the bomb soon. I got out my stethoscope and prepared. We slapped on a clock stopper. This was a heavy device. The stethoscope came first, pressed directly against the casing to listen for the ticking of a clockwork mechanism. Silence meant either no delay fuse was present, or the mechanism had already run down and the bomb was about to detonate from another trigger, or the stethoscope wasn't sensitive enough to hear it. The clock stopper came second. That 90-kilogram electromagnetic coil positioned around the bomb's midsection, powered by a field strong enough to arrest a turning clockwork if it was still running. Then, once the officer was satisfied, or not satisfied but committed anyway, came the extraction. The officer was alone for that part, his team at a distance, behind whatever cover existed. The officer at the fuse pocket with his tools, following the procedure if the procedure applied, improvising if it didn't. Sergeant Beckingham, working a bomb at Victoria Station in May 1941, described the calculus of the approach with a simplicity that had been calibrated over months. I just kept to my philosophy that if a bomb went off and I was right on top of it, then I wouldn't know anything about it. It would be a nice, quick death. The paperwork filed after each call-out, the incident report, the fuse number, what had been tried, what had worked, what hadn't, moved upward through the chain to the Unexploded Bomb Committee at the Ministry of Supply. Whatever could be extracted from a failed encounter with a new fuse type was distilled into an update to the procedure, which then moved back down to the sections still operating. That was the system. It ran on paper and on the survival of at least one officer per new encounter. The German bomb fuse catalogue that the Luftwaffe deployed in 1940 wasn't a single weapon. It was a series, each new type designed to defeat the countermeasure the British had managed to develop for the previous one. The SC-250, 250 kilograms of bomb, 130 kilograms of explosive filling, was the most commonly dropped device of the Blitz. It carried 2 fuse pockets, which could accept different devices simultaneously. The first major delayed action fuse encountered in volume was the Type 17, a clockwork mechanism, electrically fired, adjustable for delays from seconds to over 80 hours. A bomb with a Type 17 fuse could sit silent in a London street for 3 days or more. That was the design intention. The Luftwaffe's chief of bomb equipment explained after the war that the delayed action fuse was engineered to cause disruption to the enemy's armaments industry, to transport and to the general public, and would tie up considerable bomb disposal resources. When Churchill sent a memo to his chief military assistant in October 1940, asking for a count of UXBs outstanding, the answer documented the scale: 2,608 new devices in the week ending September 21st. The BD sections were being doubled and doubled again. 12 sections covering London at the start of the intensive raids. 55 by late October, 88 by November. But more sections meant more men encountering fuse types for the first time, and first encounters were where men died. The number 15 impact fuse came first. The Crabtree key rendered it safe. Two pins that depressed the spring-loaded plungers on the fuse head and permitted extraction. That procedure worked reliably until the number 25 appeared, a more sensitive variant of the 15. The first BD officer to use the Crabtree key on a number 25 was killed. The number 25 had a small screw-headed switch on top of the fuse head that had to be moved from position 1 to position 2 before the Crabtree could engage safely. Nobody knew this until someone extracted a dud 25 intact and got it to the Unexploded Bomb Committee for analysis. The dud made the knowledge transmissible. The officer who first encountered the 25 in a live bomb didn't survive to transmit it himself. This was the pattern. Each fuse type announced its existence by killing the first officer who encountered it without knowing what it was. The gap between first encounter and procedure established was measured in funerals. The number 17 delayed action fuse was eventually mapped. The clock stopper could arrest the mechanism. An officer with the correct equipment and procedure could extract a Type 17 without dying. The BD sections began to manage the delayed action problem systematically, which was precisely when the Germans introduced the problem inside the problem. The ZUS-40, Zündersperre 40, meaning fuse lock, was a small mechanical unit, spring-loaded, designed to sit in the bottom of the same fuse pocket that held the Type 17 clockwork device. From the outside, a bomb fitted with a ZUS-40 was indistinguishable from a bomb without one. The fuse head still showed the familiar Type 17 designation. The standard procedure still applied: clock stopper, stethoscope, extraction. The extraction would work exactly as trained. The Type 17 would come free with its familiar resistance, and the ZUS-40 spring, released from the pressure of the seated fuse, would fire the main charge. An experienced officer, someone who had handled 50 or 100 Type 17 fuses without incident, applying the procedure exactly as trained, following exactly the steps that had kept him alive through the previous 50 jobs, would remove the Type 17 and die. His experience wasn't protection. His experience was a liability, because his experience told him the procedure was safe when in this specific instance it wasn't. The compound bomb arrangement confirmed in German ordnance records placed a Type 17 clockwork fuse in one pocket with a ZUS-40 seated beneath it, and a Type 50 anti-handling fuse in the other pocket. 3 separate kill mechanisms in a single bomb. The ZUS-40 hid under a familiar device. The Type 50 was a different class of threat entirely. An electric anti-disturbance fuse with 3 mercury switches, designed to detonate the main charge if the fuse was disturbed or rotated. The British came to call the Type 50 and its variants the Y fuse, from a distinguishing marking stamped on the face of the device. From the outside, when examined, the Y fuse behaved exactly like a standard impact fuse. The additional circuit, the mercury switches that would fire if the fuse was turned even slowly, was isolated during arming and activated only after the bomb landed. An officer reading the fuse number from the head would see a familiar designation and proceed. The mercury switches would fire if he turned it. BD documentation on the Y fuse described its specific design. The fuse behaved exactly like a normal one when tested, but had an additional circuit that was isolated after activation: mercury tilt switches that would detonate the bomb if the fuse was turned, even slowly. It was a booby trap, engineered to kill bomb disposal personnel. Acting Squadron Leader Eric Lawrence Moxey of the RAF Bomb Disposal Section understood what the Germans were building before most of his contemporaries. On August 27, 1940, the same day Archer was recovering fuse specimens at Port Talbot docks, Moxey was killed. Before he died, he had provided the War Office with physical specimens of type 17, 25, 26, 38 and 50 fuses, as well as the ZUS-40 anti-handling device, specifically for laboratory examination. He was 46 years old. The specimens he delivered were the basis on which the early countermeasures were developed. The man who understood the devices well enough to assemble a complete specimen set died on the same afternoon that the machinery using those devices was being prepared for the largest bombing campaign in history. The anti-handling crisis of 1940 and into 1941 wasn't one device. It was a compound problem. The ZUS-40 hidden beneath a familiar Type 17, the Type 50 and Y fuse variants that registered as standard impact fuses from external examination, and the gap between what a trained BD officer thought he was dealing with and what the bomb actually contained. Both had been engineered with the same purpose: to kill the man trying to make the bomb safe. Both were engineered to be undetectable through the standard examination procedure. The period before any reliable countermeasure existed for the Y fuse implies the duration of losses during those years. 6 Royal Engineers were killed near Nantwich, Cheshire, on August 17, 1940. In the week of September 23rd, 20 BD personnel were killed across Britain. On October 18th, 7 BD men, including Lieutenant Michael Gibson, were killed when a 550-pound bomb detonated while they were transporting it across a Coventry housing estate. Gibson had already been cited for a George Cross for an earlier Coventry incident in September, where he had sent his team to safety and extracted a fuse by hand from a bomb emitting what his account described as an unusual hissing noise. He worked alone, extracted it, and saved the factory. A month later, the bomb won. Hartley's 1958 account places the 1940 casualties at 123 officers and men killed, from a comparatively small force. A figure sometimes cited for the officer-specific losses in the 1940 to 41 period runs to around 79, though the precise provenance of that number hasn't been fully established in the historical record. And the broader figures, nearly 400 bomb disposers killed across the duration of the Fuse War, 490 total BD unit members killed by 1947, give some sense of the scale without resolving the officer-specific breakdown. What no aggregate figure can show is the distribution. How many died in the first encounter with each new device, before any procedure existed? How many in the second and third encounters, when knowledge was being assembled but had not yet reached all sections? The Royal Engineers Bomb Disposal Roll of Honour, compiled by Peter Markham over 2 decades and running to 4 volumes, documents individual deaths with unit designations, dates, locations, causes and next of kin notifications. The entries read as what they are: a ledger. Sapper Cecil Ronald Taylor of the 60th Bomb Disposal Section, born 1919 in Warwickshire, killed September 23, 1940. He was with a working party excavating a bomb at Navarino Mansions, Dalston Lane, Hackney, after the agreed safety period had elapsed. The bomb detonated spontaneously. 6 men died with him. The roll notes, no survivors. Taylor was 21 years old. The entry sits in the same weekly tally as the 20 BD personnel killed across Britain in that same 7 days. Sapper Henry Taylor killed March 10, 1941, when a delayed action bomb detonated near St Paul's Cathedral. He was brought in dead to St Bartholomew's Hospital. The entry notes that Sapper O. Garner also died at the same incident, and that an officer and a senior NCO were wounded. Lance Corporal Robert Taylor killed May 7, 1941, when a UXB detonated during excavation in Denbigh, Wales. His sergeant, 2 sappers, and a driver died with him. No civil inquest was held, owing to the nature of the incident. These are individual entries in a ledger that runs for hundreds of pages. Each name is a fact about what happened on a specific day at a specific location. Some of the entries also contain, between the lines, a fact about what changed afterwards. A procedure updated, a piece of equipment modified, a note circulated to the sections working nearby. The knowledge experiment didn't run cleanly. It ran in fits, with gaps between what one section knew and what the next section had been told. When those gaps corresponded with the presence of a new device, the next entry in the ledger was another death. Archer's George Cross was awarded on September 30, 1941, and announced in the London Gazette on April 15, 1942, more than a year after the Llandarcy incident. The citation as published lists 3 incidents. St Athan Aerodrome on July 15, 1940, where Archer drove a lorry, bomb still fused inside, 2 miles to a detonation site rather than wait for the delay mechanism to run down near a vitally important assembly shed. Moulton on August 17, 1940, where a number 50 fuse was required for War Office experiments and the standard extraction tool failed, so Archer removed it by hand using a pick head, while fully aware the fuse might be a booby trap. And Port Talbot Docks on August 27, 1940, where he recovered fuse specimens for experimental purposes. Llandarcy, September 2, 1940, the operation that secondary accounts consistently identify as his defining contribution, does not appear by name in the formal citation text as available in the Gazette records. The GC was awarded for a sustained record across multiple incidents, not for a single moment. And the citation's framing makes the intelligence function explicit. Archer recovered specimens at Port Talbot. He extracted a fuse the UXB committee needed at Moulton. The Military Wiki citation text, drawn from the original announcement, states that he provided the War Office with 5 different fuses, as well as the ZUS anti-handling devices. The devices he collected were the basis on which countermeasures were developed. His George Cross was partly for courier work, for being the conduit through which knowledge moved from inside the bomb to the men who could act on it. And the citation recognized this in its specific language, rather than simply citing exceptional physical courage. Archer served in number 104 Bomb Disposal Section. He rose to colonel. He became chairman of the Victoria Cross and George Cross Association in 1994 and held that position for 12 years. On February 3, 2015, his 100th birthday, he became the first recipient of either the Victoria Cross or the George Cross to reach that age. The first person in the entire history of either award to reach it. He died May 2, 2015, in his own flat in North London, aged 100. The IWM Sound Archive holds his oral history. Reel 5 is his account of Llandarcy. The catalogue object number is 800-23514. A few entries away in the catalogue sits another oral history. Kenneth Revis, object number 800-13367. Kenneth Revis had been training as a structural engineer when the war began in September 1939. A parallel with Archer's architectural background that the BD community registered when, in December 1997, the Royal Engineers Association bomb disposal newsletter listed both men. Archer as president of the group, Revis as a member. Captain, retired, Ken Revis, MBE. Two men from the same professional formation, both trained to understand how structures bear load and how they fail. Both given an education in what happens when someone engineers a structure specifically to fail when you try to take it apart. Revis enlisted in 1939, served with No. 12 Bomb Disposal Company from 1941 and No. 17 BD Company in 1943, and was blinded in September 1943 while clearing mines at the West Pier in Brighton. He was 26 years old. His IWM oral history exists. The book about his life, Blinding Flash, documents what came after. The reconstruction of a civilian career, his wife Jo, his appearance on the television programme This Is Your Life, and decades of continued connection to the BD community. His blinding came in 1943, which places it outside the core Blitz period of 1940 to 41. He belongs in this account nonetheless. The knowledge network that Archer and Moxey and Gibson and Sapper Taylor and the men in the Roll of Honour built in 1940 was the same network Revis was operating inside in 1943. The procedures he followed had been written by men who died establishing them. The devices he encountered had been evolved by the same German engineering program that had evolved the ZUS-40 and the Y-fuse, each iteration designed to defeat the countermeasures that the preceding deaths had made possible. His blinding at Brighton was a continuation of the same experiment, not a separate one. What the IWM catalogue preserves: Archer's voice in Reel 5, Revis's account in Object 800-13367, is the transmission of knowledge across time that the BD experiment was always trying to achieve. The oral histories are what the handwritten notes aspired to be: primary testimony from men who were there, describing what it felt like to work inside a system that treated their survival as a secondary variable. By May 1941, when the main Blitz tapered off, the Royal Engineers had made safe over 24,000 bombs. The total number of unexploded devices across the war reached something like 50,000. Roughly 10% of all high-explosive bombs dropped on Britain failed to detonate on impact, a failure rate the Germans considered acceptable because even an unexploded bomb forced a cordon, an evacuation, a disruption to whatever had been interrupted. Hartley described 1940 and 1941 as the heroic age of bomb disposal, a period of individual prowess when urgency and a lack of knowledge and equipment led to the taking of fantastic risks, to fantastic escapes, and to many, many deaths. He had been inside the units. He understood what he was describing. Heroic, in his usage, carries no triumphalism. It describes a condition, the condition of men working without adequate equipment or adequate intelligence, improvising because the knowledge required had not yet been paid for, and paying for it as they went. By the end of 1940, the Royal Engineers had introduced a provision allowing every BD expert to transfer to another section after 6 months of active service. The psychological rationale was documented. 2 BD officers had ended up in court in October 1940, charged with assaulting a policeman while drunk. Their commanding officer told the court, "We have been working at very high pressure. The men are working in the face of death all the time. I know that my own temper has become somewhat frayed. As soldiers, they are of the best. The court released both men. The provision for transfer existed. Most men didn't use it, preferring to stay with their sections rather than move to work they described as cushy. Beckingham explained the practical logic years later. Leaving meant handing the job over to someone who knew less, someone who would have to relearn at cost what the staying man already carried in his head. The knowledge in any individual officer's or NCO's experience, the specific fuse variants he had seen, the non-standard configurations that weren't in the training manual, the difference between a bomb that looked dangerous and a bomb that was dangerous, wasn't replaceable quickly. The section, as a knowledge system, regressed every time a node was removed. The casualties in the regression period were paid by whoever encountered the gaps. This is what the thesis is trying to name. The BD officers of 1940 and 1941 weren't simply brave in the conventional sense, though the conventional sense certainly applied. The specific kind of bravery the job required was a bravery that understood itself as a function, as a node in a network where knowledge decayed every time a node was lost, and where the only way to rebuild was to walk back toward the thing that had just destroyed the node you were replacing. Continuation was the point. Survival was the hoped-for outcome, not the governing principle. The George Cross, instituted by King George VI on September 24, 1940, 17 days after the Blitz began, was created because the existing medal system had no provision for the specific category of courage these men were demonstrating. The Victoria Cross required enemy fire. The new medal existed for the highest gallantry away from the conventional battlefield. The majority of initial awards went to BD personnel and civilian rescue workers. The GC citations in the London Gazette, issue 35,292 for Archer, issue 34,964 for October 8, 1940 awards more broadly, are the most detailed surviving public record of who did what and when. The Gazette is searchable and complete. The Roll of Honour is available online. The IWM Sound Archive is catalogued. The institutional memory of the BD community isn't absent from the record. It's specific and carefully maintained, the product of 20 years of work by Markham and the RE Association research team, cross-referencing 24,000 service cards. What is different is the absorption of that record into the broader national account of the war. The Blitz story that persists in popular memory centers on civilians, on fires, on the survival of specific buildings. The Danger UXB drama ran on ITV in 1979, 13 episodes, and brought the BD story to a general audience nearly 40 years after the events. Before that, the audience for Hartley's 1958 book, reviewed in the New York Times as the story of brave men who had been invisible for obvious reasons at the time, was largely the people who already knew. The obvious reasons Hartley cited were operational security. Bomb disposal work couldn't be publicised without telling the Germans which fuse types had been compromised, which countermeasures had been developed. The secrecy that protected the intelligence advantage ensured that the men who had generated it remained largely unknown. The GC citations went into the Gazette in compressed official language. Most conspicuous gallantry in carrying out hazardous work in a very brave manner, that acknowledged the courage without specifying what the courage had produced. That isn't suppression. It's the structure of technical secrecy. The most important part of the story couldn't be told while it still mattered. And by the time it could be told, The audience had moved on. The names are still there. The Gazette preserved them. The Roll of Honour preserved the deaths. The IWM preserved the voices. The Lord Ashcroft profile, published in the Daily Express in January 2015, a few weeks before Archer's 100th birthday, describes him in the terms that seem to have defined him throughout his life outside the army. An architect, a partner in his Gray's Inn firm for his entire working career, a man who had spent his professional life building things. He represented the VC and GC Association at the Queen Mother's funeral in 2002. His wife, Catherine, had died 20 years before his birthday. He had 3 children, 10 grandchildren, 11 great-grandchildren. He didn't explain himself at length. Men of his formation tended not to. The explanation was in the account.
He was an architect. He understood how things were assembled. When the things in question were German bombs, engineered to kill the men dismantling them, he applied the same discipline. Assess the structure, determine the load paths, take it apart in the sequence that leaves you standing. The men who didn't survive the same methodology left no explanations of their own. Their reasoning is preserved in the Roll of Honour entries, in the procedure updates circulated after their deaths, in the fuse specimens delivered to the War Office before the last job, in the notes passed between sections that gave the next officer slightly more information than the last one had. The experiment ran for the duration of the war. It cost what it cost. The ledger is 4 volumes long and still growing. Subscribe for more stories like this.